Alright, so Superman came out last Friday. I saw it. I want to give a quick review, see if it's worth watching for you guys. And I want to preface that I think that all the movie reviews, or most of them on this movie, are so off right now because a lot of people are either saying it is the best Superman movie of all time, and I don't think that's it. And a lot of people are saying it's also the worst Superman of all time, and that's also clearly wrong. So, first and foremost, is the movie worth watching? Yes. Is it an amazing movie? No. Is it a terrible movie? No. It's just good. It's not great, it's just good. But it's most definitely worth the watch. So I want to start by getting into a few things that I actually liked about the movie. And firstly, the biggest thing is by far Superman's portrayal. James Gunn and David Corset did a really good job showing a new kind of Superman as compared to Snyder's, because in Snyder you have Superman who's just this god. He's just like this perfect being, and that's what he is to the world. And in this movie, what you have is a guy who has superpowers who's just trying to do the right thing. And this Superman makes a lot of mistakes. He loses quite often, and he's just still learning to be Superman. And so I think the portrayal is so well done. So for example, there's a big scene at the very beginning of the movie, and this is in the trailer, so I'm going to try and stay away from big spoilers, but essentially what you have is Superman saves a country from an invasion, but the invasion was done by an ally of the US, and he's being pressed about this by Lois Lane, and he says, people were gonna die. And I think that was so good because this is the kind of Superman we want, someone who's not super invested into the political part, but it's more about doing the right thing. Even if it might not be the most politically ideal thing for the US or whatever it is, he's just doing what he thinks is right, and he's trying to save the most people. He even saves a squirrel in this movie at one point, and you're just yeah, that's the Superman we want. He's out here bringing hope, trying to just save as many people as possible, and just doing the right thing. So I think the biggest thing is the portrayals for Superman, and even some of these other characters was really well done. Like Lex Luthor, he's beating Superman in a way where he's using his brain, right? He's going sneakily and being smart about how he's kind of dismantling Superman and taking him down in this movie, and I thought that was really well done. There is Green Lantern, who I thought looked goofy in the first few trailers because he's played by Nathan Fillion, has a stupid little cut, but he actually does Green Lantern so much justice. I thought he was one of the funnier people in this movie. There's also Mr. Terrific, who is super well done, and Hawkgirl, who is super well done. And so I think one of the biggest things is that this movie sets us in a universe where it's a lot more like the comics, and it's just something that's a breath of fresh air as opposed to Snyder's completely perfect Superman who's just a god to all these people. So I think that's one of the biggest, pros for this movie. The next thing is the cinematography. So again, as opposed to Snyder's, you had a really dark undertone across the movie, whereas James Gunn uses a very warm and vibrant, color palette for the movie, and it just pops out, and it's really nice. It's like I said, a breath of fresh air for everything. So this just gives you a really big contrast to the old style, and I like this style, especially for Superman, a lot more. And considering the Batman was so much darker than what we had before, I think these two are going to contrast really nicely. But I also believe that James Gunn said that the Batman, the one that Robert Pattinson plays, is not going to be the same Batman in his DC universe if that ends up becoming a thing. So that's kind of unfortunate, but hopefully if James Gunn does do a Batman movie or at some point, that's a little darker, so that we have these really good contrasts between Batman and Superman, where one's just super dark and one is also super light. And I think that would be a great way to kind of kick off the DCU under James Gunn. Another thing is that the cinematography across the board is just really well shot. I was watching the movie, and in the first 5 minutes, the Fortress of Solitude comes up, and it is beautiful. It's stunning, and you're watching all the stuff as it happens, and it's just really beautiful to watch. So it's really easy to stay relatively engaged in some of these very beautiful scenes, and so that's another big highlight of the movie. And then finally, the soundtrack was really well done. Like I said, if you've seen James Gunn, you've probably seen Guardians of the Galaxy 1 through 3, and those movies were amazing, at least for soundtrack, cinematography, everything. This follows suit with the soundtrack. The soundtrack is just really well selected. Now, one thing I will say is that I liked Hans Zimmer's music in the Snyderverse, and I thought that the Man of Steel had some of the best soundtrack or score that any superhero movie or any movie in general has had. So it's kind of hard to compare those two. But again, James Gunn does a really good job choosing the soundtrack for this movie. So it was just, it's a good movie, and something that if you like Superman, you're very likely going to enjoy. I also wanted to highlight a few specific points in this movie that I really liked. So firstly, there is a scene where a kid is raising the flag, and it's like this little stick flag that has Superman's logo on it, and I think that scene in the movie, once you watch the movie all the way through, it's really powerful, and it just shows you that this Superman is a really big representation of hope, right? It's for all these people who don't have anything, this like kind of country that is economically destroyed, like they don't have anything. It's a very big third world country, and you just see that Superman means something to all these people regardless of what country that you're in. He means something to people across the world, and I really like that portrayal of him. So I thought that was a really good scene. And I also think there are just like some scenes, for example, some rifts are opening up, and just the visuals are, again, really well done. So overall, the movie is definitely worth the watch, especially if you like Superman. I think that's one thing that's hard to be objective about, is that if you like Superman, like objectively, I think this movie is like a 7.5 out of 10. But if you like Superman, you're gonna like the movie. Like, you're gonna enjoy the whole, thing watching. Even if it's not a perfect movie, you're likely just going to enjoy it because you're seeing your favorite superhero, fight Lex Luthor and do all these things, and it's just good. However, it's also not a perfect movie, and so I want to get into some quick cons that I thought were kind of detractors from making this a really good movie. And that's, firstly, some pacing issues. So while it's easy to stay engaged when there are some really beautiful scenes going on, there's a lot of times where two characters are having a conversation and the dialogue just gets really long, and you can really feel the runtime in certain parts of this movie where you're just not engaged. It's not really important what they're talking about. Like, it doesn't come up. Like, I'm all for having slower paced movies, and I think that's perfectly fine, except the problem here is that slow paced movies should have some sort of build up, or what they're talking about during those slow scenes should have importance, and that just doesn't come up in a few of the scenes here, and that just leads to you really feeling like this 2 hours and 20-30 minute whatever runtime it is. So I think that was one big negative. Secondly, I thought the action was underwhelming. So like I said, this is a Superman who does make mistakes. He's not like perfect, not like Snyder's, and so you get a contrast, and I think that is good. However, the action scenes were pretty like underdone, I think. There's an example where Superman's fighting one of the main villains, and it's also a metahuman who's also extremely powerful, and then he like throws Superman and he goes through like one wall. And so one big thing is that this is supposed to be the most powerful, metahuman or superhero on Earth. Superman should be like punching this guy across the city and also being punched across the city, but you don't really see that in a lot of like the big fights here, and so I thought it was a little underscaled. Like, also, while it's good to make Superman look weak in certain points, there are a few points where I thought, like, he's Superman, how is he struggling with this? Like, he's struggling to lift up a building at one point, and you're just like, this Superman should be a little stronger. And I know that it can be hard when filming these movies to get that balance of like, okay, you need to show that these characters are super strong, but you also need to show that they're kind of vulnerable, and it's also difficult to upscale that a lot of the time. But I just had an issue with the fact that it's Superman who's struggling with a lot of these like different things, and so that was kind of a bummer for me. And finally, while I did really like the main cast, like I said, I really enjoyed Superman, Lois Lane was really good, Lex, all these like different characters, I thought that the main, like the villains aside from Lex, were kind of not as well done. So there's kind of a reveal at near the end of the movie in like the final fight scene where you find out who one of these metahumans actually is, and I totally think they just went down the wrong route with this. You'll kind of see when you watch the movie, but I just thought that some of the characters that they decided to use for this movie were just kind of underwhelming, and that wasn't amazing, so they kind of missed the mark on that. So to give kind of a final verdict on everything, I think the movie is definitely worth watching, right? Maybe it's a 7.5 out of 10 if I was going to rate it, but again, if you like Superman, you're going to enjoy the movie, you're going to have a good time watching it. It's probably something that you're not going to be watching on repeat. That's another thing. Even though I think it's a breath of fresh air for the DCU, and I think there's a lot of great things that could be coming up in the future, it's not something that I would probably rewatch as many times. Like, I've seen Man of Steel like 5 or 6 times because I really like the action in Man of Steel. I really like the soundtrack, and even though it's not my favorite portrayal of Superman, it's like really well done to me. While that being said, I do think this is again a good breath of fresh air for this franchise, and hopefully it can create something bigger in the future. So I think, kind of to conclude, if you like Superman, you're gonna like this movie. It's not as bad as everybody seems to be saying it is. It's also not as good as everybody seems to be saying it is. And I think that hopefully in the future they upscale kind of this fighting a little bit. Hopefully the DCU gets expanded under James Gunn, because I think he's a very good director. And then hopefully in the next one we see a little bit more action, a little bit upscaled, whatever. So I think, anyway, it's a good movie. You're probably gonna like it. Let me know in the comments if I missed the mark. There's a lot of people who are like Snyder diehard fans who just cannot accept that this is just a good movie. And again, though, it's not perfect. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let me know what you think about the movie, if I'm wrong, if I'm right. Maybe subscribe. My plan is to start listing out or doing some movie reviews on other films that I personally think are like amazing, in case you need a movie, maybe on a weekend that you just want to watch, or you need something to take your mind off of work or the week. I want to list some of my favorite movies that maybe you haven't seen, and if that's the case, hopefully those movies can bring you some joy. But hope you guys liked the video. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.